If you ever feel out of control around food, you're not alone, and you're in the right place to learn practical, no-nonsense information about why you binge and how to stop. Binge eating does not mean that something is wrong with you. It's a natural but primitive brain response that you can correct. If you're ready for change, sign up for the Brain Over Binge self-paced online course for less than $20 per month. And if you feel you need personalized support, we also offer one-on-one coaching and group coaching. To learn more, go to brainoverbinge.com/subscribe. And I hope you enjoy the show. Welcome to the Brain Over Binge podcast, where you learn a simple, brain-based approach to ending binge eating. I'm Kathryn, your host, and I'm happy to be back for another show. Today I'm going to be talking about the faulty logic of the lower brain. If you're new to Brain Over Binge and new to the concept of the lower brain, I'm going to link episode 3 in the show description, and it's called The Lower and Higher Brain at Work in Binge Eating. So that will give you a good background for this episode. But basically, the lower brain is that primal part of our brain that wants to maintain the binge eating habit. In the Brain Over Binge approach, it's about recognizing that the lower brain will encourage you to binge with tempting thoughts. But you can learn to dismiss those thoughts. You can learn to stop taking them seriously. And most importantly, you can learn to stop acting on them. You can realize that those lower brain thoughts are not true and they're not indicative of who you truly are and what you truly want. In other words, the lower brain thoughts, when it comes to binging, are faulty. They have this faulty logic. And if you can learn to recognize that, it becomes much easier to avoid falling into that trap of following them. I find that there are several common thoughts that occur in nearly everyone with a binge eating habit, and in other habits as well. These thoughts are kind of universal when the brain gets hooked on something. I find that it's really helpful for people to know that they're not the only one having a certain thought. It's just how the brain works. It's how our primitive reward centers in our lower brain drive habits. To try to help people recognize these faulty thoughts, I've pointed them out on Instagram from time to time this year. I've done several posts that highlight a certain thought to help people realize that they're not the only one having that thought, and then also to take a deeper look at that thought and realize that it's not objectively true and it's not something that you need to take seriously. When we look at these thoughts a little more deeply and when we reflect on them with our rational mind, it's easy to see that the thoughts don't make sense and that these faulty thoughts can lead us in the wrong direction if we're not aware. In this episode, I'm going to go through each faulty thought that I shared on Instagram this year, and I want you to think about each thought and whether or not this is a thought that affects you and how you may learn to see it differently so that you avoid acting on it. My hope is that this discussion will help you not only become more aware of these thoughts, but also help you to stop believing them and to stop allowing them to affect you in the way that they're currently affecting you. I want you to know that it's okay that you're having these thoughts, but that you can have them and then simply move on with your life, and that over time, these thoughts will just gradually fade away. The first common faulty lower brain thought is, life without binge eating seems boring, so you should just continue binging. I want you to imagine a friend telling you that when they don't engage in a harmful behavior, they feel bored. Would you tell that friend that the solution to that boredom was to continue to engage in that harmful behavior? Would you ever tell that friend that the harmful behavior is better than remaining bored or trying to find other things to do to fill your time? I want you to recognize that you would never recommend binge eating to anyone who was bored. You would never recommend something harmful to anyone who was bored. So when your lower brain offers binging as a solution to being bored, I want you to see that this is absolutely false. This is faulty logic. I know that when you look at this from an objective perspective, that you know there are so many things you can do to fill your time and to serve as a remedy for boredom. But it's important to accept that for a while, as you decondition this habit, those other remedies for boredom will not seem as appealing to your lower brain because binging is what it's hooked on and what it will call for and what it will say is a solution to your boredom. So just understand that when you do other things, your lower brain will tell you that those other things are not good enough, that those other things are not satisfactory. But if you just keep going and keep dismissing the thought that says binging is the solution to boredom, that will fade away. And then eventually binging will be the last thing that you would ever consider when you're bored. The second faulty lower brain thought that I'm going to share is especially relevant at this time of year if you're listening at the time this episode is released. The thought is you can't possibly stop binge eating when there's so much tempting food around. You may find this thought comes up more in relation to the holidays or in different social events you're going to, but it's as if your lower brain is saying, well, you can't possibly make reasonable decisions around certain foods, so you might as well just give up and eat anything and everything. And if I get back to what I said in relation to the previous thought about boredom, would you ever tell a friend that the solution to a lot of tempting food would be just to eat all of it and make yourself sick and feel terrible after? It's just never a solution you would give to anyone else. So I want you to see that this is not a solution that you should believe for yourself. It can almost seem like a way to get relief from the stress of decision making around tempting foods. But again, if someone you cared about was having difficulty making decisions around tempting food, you would never recommend a binge. You would recommend learning how to make those decisions in a reasonable way, in a way that worked for them. And this is definitely something you can learn to do for yourself. But in order to do that, you have to dismiss this urge to binge. You have to dismiss the idea that the binge eating is a solution to having stress or having cravings around tempting food. Holidays or anytime you're around tempting foods can be a great opportunity to practice. It can be a great way to pick reasonable stopping points and to dismiss urges. It's really an amazing feeling when you realize you can be around tempting foods or what we could call trigger foods, and they no longer have power over you. It gives you so much freedom to be able to be in any food situation and know that it won't lead to a binge. Everyone gets to this feeling of freedom in their own way and on their own timeline. And it's okay if you don't feel completely free yet around a lot of tempting food. The important thing is just to avoid falling into the trap of believing that because it may be challenging, that means you should binge. I want you to start to see that all that tempting foods can do is trigger urges, but you always get to choose how you respond to those urges. The next faulty thought is you aren't the weight you want to be, so there's no point in trying to avoid a binge. To get to a place where you feel like you're never going to binge again, it's important to see that binge eating is not a solution to anything. And I hope you're starting to see that as a theme as I talk about these faulty thoughts. But it's really important to see that when it comes to weight, especially. Whenever binging is offered as a solution to weight issues, there's simply no logic there. So whenever the lower brain suggests that binge eating is a way to deal with how you feel about your body or the number on the scale, this is a faulty brain message and does not deserve your attention. Weight is a big topic, and it's something that I've talked about from time to time on this show. If you have questions about weight, I want to tell you can go to brainoverbinge.com/weight, and that contains all of the blog posts and podcast episodes I've done that address weight. I'll put that link in the show description because I know that this is an area where you may want to learn more. But for the purposes of this episode, it's just about recognizing that this is a faulty thought. If you aren't the weight that you want to be, it absolutely does not mean you should give up on recovery. It absolutely does not mean that a binge is the solution. Another faulty thought that's convincing is your life is still painful when you don't binge, so there's really no point of recovery. Something I always try to share on the podcast is that being binge-free never means being pain-free. Life is just really challenging. It can be really hard sometimes. And when you stop binging, that doesn't change. Your brain was used to focusing on the eating problems. It was used to always having that be the center of your life. And it can take some time to get used to focusing on other things. And some of those other things may be really painful things. It doesn't mean the binge eating was ever helping you cope. Just because a side effect of binging is distracting from some of your other problems doesn't mean it's truly helping you deal with those problems. When you stop this habit, it allows you to step into a whole new way of living where you are more present with your life, and that takes courage. The experience that people have when they stop binging is often that it's really exciting in so many ways. They finally are getting their life back and they're not having to deal with all of this pain and shame and guilt and all of the negative effects of binging. But there can be another side to it that can feel a little unsettling where they have to face the time they lost to the binging. They have to face some of the things they never did because they were caught up in this habit. And if you haven't listened already, I recommend that you listen to episode 162. It was titled Grief and Gratitude, and I'll link that in the show description. And in this episode, Coach Julie and I talked about some of the mixed feelings you may have surrounding recovery. But these mixed feelings and this idea that life is still painful even after recovery never means you should return to binging. So again, for the purposes of this show, it's about seeing that this thought is false. This thought is faulty. Because life is painful, binging is never a solution. If it were a solution, you would have continued happily binging without ever wanting to recover, but you know the pain it brought. You know it was just bringing additional pain to your life, and you can definitely learn to recognize this faulty thought and dismiss it. The next thought that's also common around the holidays is if you eat an unhealthy food, you might as well binge and start over tomorrow. This might be the most common binge encouraging thought, so it's so important to see the faulty logic in this. And I know that stepping back from this thought, you can see that eating the food that you consider imperfect or eating in a way that you maybe didn't want to eat, you can see that that's so much less harmful than going into that binging behavior that you know is truly going to hurt you. But in the moment, it can feel tempting. So it's really important to expect that this thought may arise and to realize that imperfect eating never has to equal binge eating. So for this one, you can listen to episode 93, Embracing Imperfection, and I'll link that in the show description too. And it's helpful to dig deeper into some of these other episodes if these thoughts feel really sticky for you and you're having a hard time detaching from them or realizing that they're faulty. But as you learn more and increase your awareness and really start to see that these thoughts are not leading you in the right direction, the idea is that you just have the thought and you immediately dismiss it. You immediately don't give it any further consideration and you just move on with your life. So you'll be able to eat something that you consider imperfect, have that thought saying, oh, this means you should binge and start over tomorrow, and just continue on with your life and continue eating in the way that works for you and living in the way that works for you and not even be affected by that thought at all. The next thought, which applies more to people who engage in purging behaviors, is it's okay to binge now because you can do something afterward to correct it. This is never a true thought. Nothing corrects a binge. Nothing ever erases it. Nothing ever compensates for it. A binge is a harmful behavior, always, no matter what you do after. Any purging behaviors or restrictive dieting that you do afterward only cause further harm. It only causes further health risks to you. To be free of binging and purging, you really have to see this thought as complete false logic from the lower brain. You have to see it as a way the brain is trying to excuse the behavior, that it's trying to make justifications for it. It's trying to tell you everything's going to be okay because you're going to fix it afterward, but that's never true. Using myself as an example, I used to have the thought of, it's okay to binge now because you can spend all day at the gym tomorrow. And that's something I never would have told anyone else. And I told it to myself and I believed it in that moment. And to recover, it took being able to see that thought as a habitual justification for the binge and not acting on it. And then I got to be free of not only the binge, but the exhausting purge afterward as well. The last two thoughts I'll share are more holiday specific, but they can also apply at any time of the year. There's the I'm too busy with the holidays to even bother with recovery. And again, this could apply to any time of the year that you find yourself really busy. It's important to see the faulty logic in this thought because while recovery can take some time and effort, binging takes up way more of your time. It takes up so much more of your mental space than dismissing urges does, than eating enough food does. So the idea that you're too busy to stop a behavior that takes up so much of your time just doesn't make any sense. When you don't binge, you're giving yourself the gift of getting so much time back in your life. You don't have to convince yourself of all of that in the moment when you're having that thought. You just have to recognize that thought, realize on a deep level that it doesn't have any value or truth to you, and then go on with your life, just doing the best you can, even through busy times. The last faulty lower brain thought that I'm going to share is I'll binge all I want through the end of this month, and then I'll quit on January 1st. This is a version of the one last time thoughts that I've talked about a lot on this podcast. It's just how the brain works to keep you doing the behavior that it thinks you need. And in December, instead of telling yourself it's going to be your last binge, you may start telling yourself that it's going to be your last year of binging. You tell yourself that after December, you'll be done for the rest of your life. So these are the final weeks of being caught up in the habit. And that really provides justification leading up to the end of the year for you to stay stuck in this cycle. It's so important to see that the one last time thoughts or the last month of binging thoughts or the last year of binging thoughts, that these thoughts only serve to justify the behavior in the moment. When we promise to quit later, it only gives us a reason to binge now. You want to be binge free on any day, in any month, in any year. So if you are having some of these thoughts in December, remind yourself that you want to be binge free in December as well. You can absolutely dismiss those thoughts this month. You can do your best to make reasonable food decisions, even in tempting eating situations, and you can go into the new year feeling great. And one more time, I'm going to refer you to a podcast episode that goes into this a little more deeply. I'm going to link episode 73 in the show description, and it's called A Different December. Don't wait until the new year to recover. And it does go through some of the thoughts you may have in December and how to detach from them so that you can actually enjoy this month as well, because there's nothing magical about January that's going to erase your binge eating habit. You actually have to do the work of recognizing these thoughts and not taking them seriously any time of year. Those are the common faulty lower brain thoughts that I wanted to share, but there are definitely more. I want you to try to notice what specific faulty lower brain thoughts are tempting you to binge and start to become more aware of those and take a more objective look at those thoughts and realize they're not speaking your truth and you can learn to let them go. If you want some help recognizing your own patterns and overcoming them, we have some great opportunities this month to get additional guidance. Brain Over Binge coach Julie and I have some one-on-one coaching spots still available, and you can book your spot at brainoverbinge.com/1-on-1-coaching, and that link will be in the show description. You can also join the highly supportive Brain Over Binge group anytime for access to the forum, to weekly group coaching calls with Julie, and monthly Q&A calls with me. When you join the group, you also get access to the Brain Over Binge course and to Coach Julie's online retreats. And I'm really excited to announce that her next retreat is coming up. The retreat will be on December 30th from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. This is such a good opportunity to learn strategies and actionable tools to help you overcome binging and develop a healthy relationship with food. You can learn more about the retreat at brainoverbinge.com/retreat. And you can learn more about the Brain Over Binge group and join to get access to that retreat for free at brainoverbinge.com/group. Thank you so much for being here today. I hope that this episode has helped you learn to recognize some of your lower brain thoughts so that you can detach from them and stop believing them. As you dismiss these faulty messages, I want to encourage you and remind you that you have the power to change your brain and live a binge-free life. The Brain Over Binge podcast is produced and recorded by Brain Over Binge Recovery Coaching, LLC. All work is copyrighted by Brain Over Binge Recovery Coaching, LLC, and all rights are reserved. As a disclaimer, the hosts of the Brain Over Binge podcast are not professional counselors or licensed healthcare providers, and this podcast is not a substitute for medical advice or any form of professional therapy. Eating disorders can have serious health consequences, and you are strongly advised to seek medical attention for matters relating to your health. Please get help when you need it, and good luck on your journey. Need more help? You can find all of our current and upcoming options for support at brainoverbinge.com.